Okay, imagine this. You step into the orbit of someone who seems to operate without any internal brakes. A mind where, I don't know, intense calculation meets just complete volatility. 1 minute, they can be utterly captivating, full of charm. But the next, there's this baffling detachment. Like the consequences of their actions just don't register. What's it actually like inside that kind of psychological landscape when built on these hidden fundamental contradictions?
Well, it's probably the ultimate expression of internal friction, isn't it? A really profound psychological struggle where often the internal experience is just as chaotic, maybe even painful for that person.
As the external fallout is for everyone else around them.
Exactly.
And that's really the heart of our deep dive today. We're trying to pull back the curtain, look at the internal struggles, the neurological factors, the hidden things that fuel these patterns we often associate with sociopathic traits.
Yep.
We want to move past that sort of flat movie villain caricature.
Right.
And understand the complex wiring underneath.
Mm-hmm. And our mission here, it's really about informed exploration. We're looking squarely at that intersection of extreme behavior and the underlying biology of the brain. The goal is awareness, a deeper understanding of the mechanisms, while, and this is crucial, while absolutely holding space for accountability for any harmful actions that result. It's about understanding the functional limitations that might contribute to the choices being made.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Let's get into the mechanics. The first struggle you often see, the one that seems to provide this relentless, sometimes destructive momentum, it's pure impulsivity, right? Uninhibited.
Yeah, you could visualize it like an engine just running full throttle, but the brakes, every time you try to hit them, the transmission just slips. They don't engage properly.
Think about maybe a time you made a really terrible snap decision. Maybe blowing your savings on one wild weekend or starting a fight you knew, even as the words were coming out, was going to cause real damage. For individuals with these traits high up, this isn't just like an occasional lapse. It's a constant, overwhelming force they're dealing with.
And this is where we see a pretty direct link between brain structure and behavior. Research looking into these impulsive antisocial patterns points towards structural irregularities, specifically differences in gray matter volume in really critical parts of the prefrontal cortex.
The brain's executive control center.
Exactly. The part that's supposed to handle planning and impulse control.
Okay, wait. The idea that recklessness could be driven partly by brain structure, not just pure choice. That's significant. But how does more gray matter in some areas translate to less control? That sounds backward.
It does sound counterintuitive, I get that. Until you consider that the tissue might be, let's say, misallocated or maybe not developed optimally for its inhibitory job, we often see these kinds of irregularities affecting the ventromedial prefrontal cortex of VMPFC. Now, this area is absolutely vital for calculating the value of future consequences. It's the little voice that says, hey, if you do this now, you're going to pay for it later.
So if the VMPFC is structurally different or maybe not functioning optimally, that future thinking voice is what? Muffled. We're just not there.
Pretty much. The whole complex process of putting the brakes on an urge, resisting that immediate reward for a better long-term outcome, it gets short-circuited. So it's not just choosing to be reckless. It's a genuine biological difficulty in accessing the very mechanism needed for effective long-term consequence evaluation. And that provides a kind of biological underpinning for these self-destructive patterns, substance abuse, sudden aggression, financial ruin. The person often struggles just to pause long enough for that stop signal to even register properly.
Wow. Okay. And that inability to pause, to really feel the weight of future consequences, that leads us right into the second struggle, doesn't it? The one that's often so painful for the people around them, the difficulty forming genuine reciprocal relationships.
This is what you call the struggle of the mirror that won't reflect.
Yeah, it feels like that. If you've ever experienced this dynamic, you know that deep frustration. They can have this incredible surface charm. They can win over a whole room, network like a pro, tell you exactly what you want to hear. But when you try to connect on a deeper emotional level, it's like hitting a wall. They just can't seem to reciprocate that genuine care.
And if we look at the neurology again, studies suggest that individuals showing these traits often display reduced activity in the brain's mirror neuron system.
Ah, the mirror neurons. The system that lets us kind of internally simulate what someone else is feeling. The biological root of empathy, essentially.
Precisely. For most of us, we see someone in distress, our mirror neurons fire up, and we instantly get a shadow of that feeling ourselves. For individuals with these traits, that automatic, intuitive emotional simulation seems to be diminished. Now, they might still have cognitive empathy. They can intellectually figure out, okay, this person is upset because I did X, Y, Z.
Like solving a logic puzzle.
Right. But they often lack that vital emotional component, the feeling part that actually generates genuine care or concern for the other person's state.
So their entire social world has to be navigated almost like a complex calculation rather than an intuitive flow of feelings between people.
And in many ways, yes, they might even express a conscious desire for deep relationships. Maybe they observe them in others and want that. But their own neural wiring seems to create this invisible barrier. They can understand the mechanics of affection, perhaps mimic them quite well. But that raw, visceral feeling of deep intimacy, of shared emotional experience, it often remains inaccessible. So they're left relying on charm, manipulation, sometimes tools for navigating the surface because the deeper machinery for bonding just isn't operating the same way.
Okay, and this brings us to a really interesting point, challenging that stereotype of the cold, calculating sociopath we see in movies. The third struggle is actually their own intense emotional instability. We picture them as robotic, purely detached, but you're saying the reality inside their head is often quite the opposite, volatile, chaotic even.
Yeah, that perceived coldness can absolutely be a kind of shield. A facade may be protecting an incredibly unpredictable internal landscape. While they might lack empathy for others, their own emotions, anger, frustration, even joy or excitement, they definitely experience them. And often they experience them without an effective internal regulator. There's a profound difficulty in managing and channeling those feelings appropriately.
And that's the source of that unpredictable environment they create around them. They can just pivot incredibly fast, right? From totally calm to intense aggression or from laughter to lashing out, seemingly without enough external reason.
And the crucial thing here is often the trigger. These outbursts, they're frequently driven by a perceived threat, specifically a threat to their self-esteem, their status, their ego. This is where the distinction from other conditions, like borderline personality disorder, becomes really important. While the emotional intensity might look similar on the surface sometimes,
The driver is different.
fundamentally different. Their reactions are usually about protecting their own interests, defending their internal sense of power or priority. It's not typically driven by that deep fear of abandonment or instability in relationships that you see in BPD.
So it's more like an explosion of frustration when the world doesn't bend to their internal rules or expectations.
Exactly. The emotions they feel are intensely self-focused, they can be overwhelming, and crucially, they're poorly regulated. It really turns the individual's internal experience into this kind of continuous battleground.
And this need for the world to comply, to fit their view, that leads us straight to the fourth struggle, this pervasive sense of entitlement. You're saying this distorted self-image is basically the fuel for a lot of the manipulative behavior we associate with these traits.
It really is. It's this deep-seated, often subconscious belief that they just inherently deserve what they want when they want it, and the costs or consequences for other people, they just don't seem to factor into the equation in the same way. They feel irrelevant to their own goals.
Let's go back to that line-cutting analogy, but make it stronger. It's not just cutting in line. It's cutting in, being called out, and then genuinely, truly believing that you, the person who waited, are the one being unreasonable for questioning their obvious priority. It's this twisted sense of deserving that kind of goal. Permits the manipulation and exploitation without feeling internal conflict or remorse about it.
And psychologically, this entitlement often shows up as what researchers sometimes call self-image goals. What that means is their primary motivation in social interactions is constantly constructing, maintaining, or sometimes aggressively defending this idealized positive self-image, regardless of whether it matches objective reality.
So they're always optimizing their own personal narrative, even if it means rewriting reality for everyone else involved.
Precisely. And you'll see specific behaviors designed to do just that, like aggressively overstating their own accomplishments, immediately and fiercely deflecting any kind of criticism or blame, even for small things, or overreacting, sometimes violently, to what others might see as just minor slights or disagreements. This whole behavioral structure acts like a massive defense mechanism. It's built purely to avoid self-reflection, to avoid introspection, or having to acknowledge any personal flaws or imperfections. To them, being wrong or being seen as less than perfect can feel like an existential threat.
Wow. That inability to be wrong, combined with the impulsivity and the emotional volatility we talked about, it all seems to culminate in the final struggle. Just sheer, inconsistent behavior. This is kind of the synthesis that makes building reliable trust almost impossible.
Absolutely. This is where you really see the shifting sands of trust. It guarantees that interacting with them is profoundly unpredictable and often deeply damaging to relationships.
Think about that classic example, maybe in a workplace. The colleague who is just brilliant in the pitch meeting, charming, engaging, totally sells the idea, the person you absolutely want on your team. But then, when the actual deadline arrives, the real work needs doing. Poof, they disappear, only to reappear later with the most elaborate, self-serving, often completely contradictory excuse you've ever heard. That charming person and that unreliable person. They're the same individual, just operating on different internal settings, different triggers.
And this erratic behavior, it stems directly from those neurological inconsistencies we've been discussing. Studies often point to variations in how the amygdala reacts to emotional and social stimuli. Remember, the amygdala is like our brain's main alert system, crucial for judging threats, deciding what's relevant, assessing social importance.
So their internal alarm system doesn't just run too low, like with empathy. It runs erratically, sometimes too high, sometimes too low.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. Sometimes the amygdala might be hyperreactive to internal feelings. A minor frustration feels like a major personal attack, leading to that sudden aggression or outburst. Other times, it might be hyporeactive, underreactive to external social cues. They might completely fail to register the fear or sadness or disappointment in a colleague or partner, which results in that cold detachment or inappropriate responses. This unpredictable swing in their neural landscape just ensures their behavior is a constantly moving target. And that makes sustained, reliable, genuine trust incredibly difficult, maybe nearly impossible for anyone who has to rely on them.
So when we zoom out and look at this whole picture, what's the main takeaway?
Well, I think it tells us that these profound difficulties, the impulsivity, the emotional chaos, the struggle to connect deeply, they really stem from complex, often biologically influenced psychological factors. It's just far too easy, too simplistic to label these actions as pure, calculated malice. By understanding the challenges that seem inherent in their neuroarchitecture, we're kind of compelled towards a more informed awareness.
And like we said right at the start, understanding the why, the potential causes, it doesn't excuse the harm. It doesn't justify it. Accountability is still paramount. But maybe informed awareness means we stop defaulting to explanations of just simple evil.
Absolutely. The destructive choices are real, the impact is real, but the internal struggle to regulate, the difficulty in making different choices due to these underlying factors, that's also profoundly real for the individual.
Okay, so here's a final thought, something maybe to mull over, blending that philosophy with the brain science we've touched on. If the actual physical structures in the brain, the ones that enable deep connection, the ones that enable us to pause and weigh future consequences, if those are biologically impaired or different, where exactly does an individual's true capacity for free will begin and end in that context? How do we balance accountability, which is essential, against this complex, maybe somewhat fixed map of the human brain? Maybe just take a moment to reflect. How often do you or we attribute malice to someone's difficult actions when the real driver, deep down, might actually be this relentless internal struggle, a struggle for regulation or for connection that they are perhaps neurochemically ill-equipped to win easily?